Welcome to Light Boxes, a football show. I'm your host, Rob Ballantine, and on today's episode, we're doing a deep dive on the NFC South. Not the most formidable division in most people's eyes. You've got the Buccaneers, who are the only franchise of the four to have displayed any competence over the last few years, but I wouldn't call them world beaters. You got the Falcons and Panthers that are both feisty, and then you got the Saints, who are less so, but it still should be an interesting division, so let's get into it. Let's take a look at the betting markets for the NFC South. Now, betting markets are an imperfect science for judging which teams are good and bad, since the lines are set with statistical models first, but then move around based on the betting public. But betting markets still give you an idea, and for those who are unfamiliar with how betting lines work, the bigger a number is with a plus in front of it, the less likely it is to happen. So if you look at this screen, bottom right corner, the Saints have plus 790 shot to make the playoffs. That's the second worst in the entire league, tied with the Giants. Plus 790 means if you bet $100, they will give you $790. That's simple. On the flip side, anything with a minus in front of it is more likely to happen because you will get less payout. So the Bucs being minus 158 to make the playoffs means that if you bet $158, they'll pay you $100. So you will be making less than your original stake that you put in. As you see here, the Bucs clearly have an edge over the rest of the teams. I wouldn't count the Falcons and Panthers out just yet, although they definitely have a bit of a hill to climb. You can even see, though, that their betting line, their win totals of 7.5 and 6.5, both of those, the betting markets are saying they'll go over more likely than they'll go under, since they have minus odds to do that. Whereas even the Saints going over 5.5 wins seems less likely, according to the odds. The NFC South plays the entire AFC East this year, and the Bills are the only team in that group that should feel intimidating. The rest of them could pose a good matchup, but some of those matchups might even be favorable for the teams we're talking about today. And they play the NFC West. The NFC West teams are all generally competent. Some of them have very high peaks, but some of them have pretty low valleys. The potential outcomes is a wide range, so who knows exactly what kind of test they're going to get from each of those teams. I would still bet that those aren't going to be pushovers. When we get into each team's deep dive, I'll touch on their unique opponents. And let's kick it off with the New Orleans Saints. Yes, you're reading that right. General manager Mickey Loomis is in his 24th year, yet the coaching staff is all starting fresh. This is a classic misalignment of incentives situation. The team should be incentivized to rebuild. They won 5 games last year. They're projected to win 5 games again this year. And the coaching staff should be afforded the chance to wipe the slate clean, build a new culture to be competitive down the line. Mickey Loomis has never operated that way, and there's no reason for him to change this late into his time with the Saints. So that seems like a push and pull that won't necessarily go well. Although I want to be clear, it's not that I'm saying they should give Kellen Moore the reins. I'm pretty tepid on that hiring. I don't think he's a bad coach. He's always been competent everywhere he's at. Yes, he won a Super Bowl, but let's be honest. Everywhere he's been, the team has remained good without him. In Dallas, Dak Prescott still played well. In Los Angeles, Justin Herbert still played well, both times after Kellen Moore left town. He was good, and he was good with the Eagles, but they had Saquon Barkley, the best offensive line in the league, and a quarterback who was already getting better on his own. And the Eagles were just dreadful in 2023 with Brian Johnson. So Kellen Moore looked great by comparison. I don't think he's a ceiling raiser. I think he'll set a competent floor for this offense. I think he'll probably be good at teaching whatever young quarterback is under center some good habits. But I don't see it going much farther than that. So we're in a holding pattern with New Orleans. They need to get rid of everybody, probably. Obviously, we'll give Moore and his staff a bit of time to prove themselves, but I don't see it. And they're probably going to be wiping everything clean in a couple of years. I will note, Doug Nussmeier, offensive coordinator, That's Garrett Nussmeier's dad. If you're not familiar with Garrett Nussmeier, he's the quarterback at LSU right now. He's projected as a first-round pick. He could be a top 5 pick, and I would project the Saints to have a top 5 pick in the 2026 draft. So if things don't go great this year and they don't believe in whichever young quarterback takes the most snaps, if they don't think he's the answer for the future, I'd bet huge money on the New Orleans Saints taking the guy from in-state, Garrett Nussmeier, to play for his dad at offensive coordinator. And let's not bury the lead any farther, because quarterback Derek Carr retired. That's the biggest piece of upheaval for the Saints. If Derek Carr hadn't retired and he'd been healthy enough to play, there's no way the Saints would have considered a rebuild. I'm not saying Derek Carr is good. I'm just saying they would not have even considered a rebuild path if Derek Carr was still playing, since he is good enough to at least win you some games when he's on the field. But that has been the issue with Derek Carr, missing time and being skittish in the pocket to begin with when he isn't missing time. So he's gone, and they're going to be starting a rookie or a second-year player at quarterback. We'll talk about that later. But as far as the rest of the roster, the changes don't really move me. Brandon Cooks is pretty old, and he's a fast twitch, down the field receiver. That is not a skill set that tends to age. If he played like Adam Thielen played, we might be seeing, kind of in his 30s ability to be useful to a quarterback. I don't really see that with Brandon Cooks. He's your wide receiver 3 right now, which is as high as I would put him. But the 1 and the 2 have injuries in Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed that you have to worry about. So I hope Brandon Cooks isn't elevated too high up that depth chart. That would be looking pretty iffy for the Saints. Justin Reed's a good signing. That's the type of guy you bring into a young locker room that can help change the culture. He's only 28 right now, and he's been a Super Bowl champion. So he'll be around to help guide these young Saints. Now, there's still plenty of older Saints still on the roster. That's kind of the problem with Mickey Loomis's approach. But at least Justin Reed could help shepherd this locker room through the transition. Now they lost a young cornerback in Paulson Adebo. I don't mind it for the money. I think the Giants also didn't need to pay him what they paid him. These are 2 bottom-of-the-barrel franchises. It wasn't the time to invest that much money in corner for either of them. At least the Saints got out of that business to help clear the decks for other things. On to the draft. And the Saints had my 3rd favorite draft in the division and my 18th favorite draft in the entire league. But I don't mind it. 18th sounds harsh, but this was a really solid draft in a lot of ways. Now, if you look and you see that I had Kelvin Banks 19th, but they picked him 9th, and I had Tyler Shuck 69th, but they picked him 40th, they look like reaches. But tackle and quarterback are 2 positions where reaching can be okay, especially where this happened. For tackle, you really only find players with that movement, skill set, and body type combination up high in the draft. I believe Kelvin Banks has some coordination issues that he needs to work out, but he's a really high character guy who is going to come in and set a new tone for this franchise. And it's so rare to find human beings who can play tackle. So I'm okay with them reaching, relatively speaking, for that position. And then with quarterback, it's important not to reach on them too high in the first round, because then you're putting undue expectations on the player. But when you're picking at the top of the 2nd round, where we've seen decent to good quarterbacks go, like Derek Carr in the past, Andy Dalton, and Jalen Hurts, these are players who've had a range of outcomes, obviously with Jalen Hurts winning a Super Bowl, but these are players who went in the 2nd round, and you're drafting them because of their upside, but you're not overspending. And so while I had Shuck Moore as a 3rd rounder, whatever. If this coaching staff believes in Shuck and wants to develop him, that could be a totally fine pick. And it doesn't mean you can't reset next year. We've seen teams reset for a way higher drafted quarterback, like when the Cardinals drafted Josh Rosen 10th overall, then got rid of him the next year for Kyler Murray. But this is an easy, no-brainer situation that if Shuck doesn't show you enough in year 1, you didn't spend so much on him that you can't just grab a new quarterback in the 1st round next year, if that's who you like. Going further down, I'm going to highlight Devin Neal. this was my favorite pick of their draft because they got him way later than pretty much everyone expected. But I want to be clear that I don't think Devin Neal is this elite prospect. I think he's decent. I think he'll be a good complement to Alvin Kamara, and I think he runs the right way. There were a lot of running backs I liked more, but the fact that Neal fell this far, that is really nice value for this team. Let's be honest, the 2025 Saints season is gonna be a tough one. Either second-year quarterback Spencer Rattler is going to be taking the reins, and he looked pretty erratic in his moderate amount of starts in 2024, or Tyler Shuck, the rookie, is going to win the job. And if Tyler Shuck wins it, which is what most people presume, people are going to say, well, he's 25 years old. He turns 26 during the NFL season. Surely he's mature and NFL ready to take on that job more than other rookies. Not really. He had 32 college starts. That's a fine number, but it's not the same as like Bo Nix coming in last year with 61 college starts, or Jaden Daniels coming in with 55. If you looked at each of those players' first 32 starts, they weren't looking like really great NFL prospects. It was later when they worked out the kinks in college at Oregon and at LSU respectively, after their first stops, that's when they really started to show it. Tyler Shuck did that at Louisville last year. That's why he jumped up as high as he did. But it was a much smaller sample size than those two guys. And he was picked at 40th. If he'd been the same prospect as Bo Nix or Jaden Daniels, he would have been picked up in the top 12 picks like they were. So doesn't feel like he's just going to have some kind of quick ascendancy. He might not have the same struggles that Anthony Richardson did because he was so young coming into the league, but I just wouldn't put too much stock into it. Now then there's the defensive side of the ball, and this is the real issue. Who are they building around on that side of the ball? Brian Brzee has been spotty. Kool-Aid McKinstry, if healthy, might be a really solid corner two. I don't see him having some kind of Patrick Surtain corner one upside. That's about it. I mean, there's other good defenders on the team. You have Demario Davis and Carl Granderson and people who've put in, and of course Cam Jordan, people who've put in a lot of good snaps in the NFL. I don't see any of them getting better, and the decline for some of them could be coming rapidly. Meanwhile, you're bringing in Brandon Staley. He was maligned as a head coach. He's shown to be a pretty good defensive coordinator, but he's going to be teaching a new system without any new guys to really absorb it. Like, he's retraining a bunch of veteran defenders, and that could go fine, but you would hope to give him some cornerstone young pieces that can grow with his system. Yet again, a misalignment of time frames and incentives. So we'll see. But I can see the defense giving up a lot of points if any of their veterans have a decline in their production. Then you're relying on the quarterback and the offense to put up a bunch of points. That's tough for a rookie or a second-year player to shoulder that kind of burden. So we'll see, but that's kind of the main reason why I don't see them winning a lot of games. Now, for each team, I'll highlight what I call the fulcrum. It's the player or person or unit that is going to be most responsible for whether this team succeeds or fails, whether they go above expectations or below them. For the Saints, I put that unit as the wide receiver core, and specifically the health of it. I think this can be a really good unit if Chris Olave, who's battled concussions for a long time, and Rashid Shaheed, who's coming off a knee restoration, and Brandon Cooks, who's older and always misses time, are on the field together. If all three of them are out there, that provides a lot of help for the young QB. I do think this offensive line is headed in the right direction. They're not great yet, but they are showing promise, and adding Kelvin Banks is a good thing. So the quarterback should have some time in the pocket if he's got guys open downfield to find. So having Olave, having Shaheed, and of course having Cooks, that's a big deal. If any, or honestly, it's a high risk that all of them are missing time together, that's just a death knell for this offense. I don't see how the young quarterback's going to develop any good habits with that depleted receiving core and a bunch of young players that would be on the field behind those guys. So Olave, Shaheed, their health specifically, with a little bit of Brandon Cooks, is going to go a long way for this offense treading water. With a win total of 5.5, I obviously am taking the under. This is probably going to be a bad team, and I won't be shocked at all if they're holding the number one overall pick in the 2026 draft. I got to go through all 32 teams before I'm ready to make that proclamation, but that's the leader in the clubhouse for me. Mickey Loomis would certainly rather they not, but he probably won't have a choice in the matter after Derek Carr retired and who they're going to be starting at quarterback and what the roster looks like in general. It just feels inevitable that they'll be picking high, and for me, most likely number one. We already talked about Garrett Nussmeier, how the organization will obviously know him through his dad, Doug, but it could be Arch Manning. Now, Arch Manning may choose not to come out into the 2026 draft. You hope that if he does, and the Saints are holding the number one overall pick, that he'd want to be a Saint since his grandfather, Archie, was the Saints quarterback back in the day. But he may decide that's not a good situation for him. His uncle Peyton Manning did that same thing, electing to stay in college an extra year because he didn't want to go to the Jets the year before he came out to go to the Colts. And of course, his other uncle Eli did a whole thing to avoid going to the Chargers. So the family is familiar with that, and they may just elect to say, hey, even if Arch is the clear number one pick in 2026, if we don't like the situation, we're going to stay at Texas for one more year and take that NIL money. But in theory, even if it's not Arch, the Saints have their pick of the litter, with Nussmeier being the obvious choice in some respects. But there could be a lot of good, interesting prospects in the draft. So that's where the Saints are looking. I don't think fans should get excited about anything in the 2025 season other than how draft position is looking. Sorry, guys. Now let's do the Panthers next, one of the three teams that can compete for the division title in the NFC South. I like where the Panthers are at. Things are on the up and up, and Bryce Young, after looking like a complete lost cause in 2023 and the beginning of 2024, has really turned it around. Do I think he's necessarily ever going to be elite? Probably not. But if he can be a good enough quarterback, then they can continue to develop him. That's enough for this team right now after a lot of dreadful seasons with nothing to hang their hat on. I like the pairing of him and Dave Canales as his head coach and play caller. I think that Bryce Young has really good ball placement and they can design some things that work really well. This receiver core needs to get more accurate with their route running and develop just some of those minor details, but they're on the up and up. Adam Thielen's still there hanging on. You've got some young players growing. You've got an infusion of talent from the draft. So I like where things are headed. Now on defense, this is finally the first year where they might have some level of decency. I like that they kept Ejiro Evero. We got to see it now. Hopefully they've added some pieces that allow them to be at least average, and we can see the flashes of him as a play caller that he showed back in Denver. He's never been given the pieces, and he's shown a lot of promise back in the day. So I like that the coaching staff is deciding to keep him along, even though he predates Dave Canales and Dan Morgan, the general manager. He was in Carolina with Frank Reich's terrible regime. But the faith in Evero is awesome, and I hope that it's warranted. So let's see what he can do with better pieces. Now, I said better pieces. I wouldn't call these elite pieces. And it's hard to get elite pieces in free agency, but this is a start. And you are able to microwave your defense and get them to jump 10, 15 spots in the rankings if you just find the right capable veterans. Trayvon Merrick is totally that. Should he be the 6th highest paid safety in the league? Maybe not, but it's not like they gave him the highest contract for a safety, so I'm fine with that move. And I think Trayvon Merrick does a lot to raise the floor. And the defensive line was the biggest issue on this team. So just putting Tershawn Wharton and Patrick Jones and Bobby Brown into that mix has got to do something. If it doesn't, then we have real issues, not only with Ejiro Evero, but with Dan Morgan as a decision maker in the front office. But I do think that these are going to do a nice job at setting the table. Here's the thing with the defense, though. I believe heavily in Nick Scorton. Do I think he should have been a top 10 pick or something? No. But getting him at pick 51 late in the second round was a steal. And I know that stealing players is often overrated, because if all of these teams and all of their intelligence passed on this player, there's probably a good reason. But this is one of those exceptions a hill that I'm willing to die on, because Nick Scorton showed a ton at Purdue in his sophomore year when he got 10 sacks. Then he goes to Texas A&M, which we already know was kind of a weird ecosystem for player development. They put a bunch of extra weight on him. They ask him to just play the run first. He still gets 5 sacks. It was a huge storyline that his teammate Shamar Stewart only had 1.5 sacks in each of his 3 seasons at Texas A&M for 4.5 total. And that was a big red flag. Of course it should be. He went 17th overall to the Bengals. Scorton goes way later, yet had 5 sacks in his final season, more than Shamar Stewart did in his whole Texas A&M career. It doesn't mean he has elite bend or elite athletic traits, but I bet the Panthers are going to slim down his weight back to more of what he played at Purdue, and he's going to really be a good primary pass rusher. Not necessarily an elite TJ Watt, definitely not Myles Garrett level, but if this is a pass rusher you can build a plan around, and you added all of that depth in free agency, you're really cooking with gas now. And Princely Amunielen in the 3rd round is another good depth piece, a situational pass rusher. He can't play the run very well, but he's a good piece that gives depth and variance to this defensive line. Now, Princely Amunielen fell as far as he did partially because he's 23. Nick Scorton's still not 21. He's not even turned 21 yet, so I am appalled that he fell as far as he did, but the Panthers got a good one. And then you have Tetairoa McMillan, what I would call the Rorschach test of wide receiver prospects. You can see whatever you want in him. You can see his elite size and catch radius as a good thing. You can also see it as a way that he will have an inability to separate at the NFL level. You can see him deciding to stay at Arizona instead of transferring anywhere else as a show of loyalty. Or you can see it as him being afraid to compete and just wanting to be with his high school teammate and quarterback Noah Fafita instead of going on to greener pastures where he could compete despite his friend not being able to. Who knows? You could see him as the 3rd overall prospect like Trevor Sikkema did at PFF, or you could see him as the 50th overall prospect like Todd McShay did at The Ringer. Those are 2 analysts that I respect. I ended up having him right around where the Panthers picked him, and I think this is great for their team build. You want to build a wide receiver core like a basketball team, a bunch of different sizes and a bunch of different skill sets. We're not building around Adam Thielen anymore. He's way too old for that. He has a different skill set. But if you're building around Tetairoa McMillan as your big X receiver, Xavier Legette as your down the field, deep dig route kind of player, and Jalen Coker in the slot, you have a nice complement of skill sets. So will Tetairoa McMillan be elite? Maybe not. There are a lot of red flags about him, but I tend to see the positives outweighing the negatives, and I believe they made a good pick here that should complement the rest of what they have on offense. I like where the Panthers are at on paper going into the 2025 season. I don't love it. Like, there's definitely some leaps of faith that need to be taken if you think that they're going to be competitive this year. I might be willing to make some of those, but we'll touch on that later. But I do find it interesting that they didn't address the offensive line at all in any meaningful way between free agency and the draft. This is a decent unit. They run block really well. They aren't that good at pass blocking, though, and if you're hitching your wagon to Bryce Young down the line, you would love to have a little more pass blocking support and just depth, because if 1 or 2 pieces go down, if they don't have the same health along the offensive line this year, and then the running game takes a fall off the cliff, that also fails to support Bryce Young and his development. So that was something I'm keeping an eye on, and it's one of the common things where, oh, you've got a young, promising team, they're probably going to take the next step. Well, if the offensive line falls apart, if there's any issues where they take a step back, then that leap for the whole team never happens. So it's one of the reasons why we have to be just a little tentative with the Panthers. But there's a lot of promise. And like I said earlier, the defense should be going from something terrible to something in the teens as far as the quality of defense, because I do believe in Ejiro Evero, and I do believe in Nick Scorton anchoring this pass rush, even midway through this season. Yes, he's a rookie, but even midway through this season, I think we're going to see some good things from him. So things are looking up. For the Panthers, it would be so easy to just pick Bryce Young. And, with any young quarterback, whether they succeed or fail will determine how the team does. But I'm going to go with head coach Dave Canales here. He made his mark in this league helping develop Geno Smith in Seattle. Then he went to Tampa Bay. He really helped get Baker Mayfield's career back on track. Baker had done some of his own steps, but Dave Canales really contributed there. And then now Bryce Young is looking better. But we need to see a little more from him. With Bryce Young being such a short quarterback, I would love to see a more effective screen game. I want layups that he can just see out to the side and not have to worry about the mess in the middle of the field to help gain easy yards and create more short down and distances. And the screen game was pretty vanilla. I think there are players like Leggett and like Jalen Coker who have enough juice to capitalize on the screen game. Plus, Chuba Hubbard is a totally decent receiving back. So is Rico Dowdle, who they signed in free agency. None of these players are elite, flashy, but they can get the job done if the screen game isn't kind of so obvious and so barely used and so not integrated into the structure of the entire offense. So that's the thing I'm looking for from Dave Canales and why I would call him the fulcrum for this team. Their win total is 6.5, and I will take the over. Not comfortably. Looking at their unique opponents of the Dallas Cowboys, the Green Bay Packers, and the Jacksonville Jaguars, plus just the rest of their schedule, that's not easy. I think the Cowboys are improved. I think the Jaguars should be a fun matchup of Liam Cohen and Dave Canales, who really helped Baker Mayfield the most bowl. And the Packers are a good team always. So do I think they'll definitely exceed it? No. But I think that line, that win total, really reflects people not being ready for this defense to be okay at minimum. And I just do think it will be. And I think Bryce Young, with his good ball placement and the construction of that offense in general, I think there's enough there to believe in them. Don't forget, they hung in with the Eagles and the Chiefs last year. Those are the two teams in the Super Bowl, and they lost one-score games to them. They really should have beaten the Eagles, if not for a Xavier Leggett drop. So this is a team with some promise. I will say they're going to win 7 or more games. I would probably think of them as like 8-9, 9-8, maybe competing for the division if a couple things break right. But I like this team a good amount. The Atlanta Falcons, though, are a team that confounds me. They have all these redundancies, as I'd call them. They have these moments where they don't really address something, and then they completely overcorrect with too many resources to that thing. It's not just the quarterback situation. That's the obvious one. They didn't have a quarterback for years, so they signed Kirk Cousins, but then also draft Michael Penix with the 8th overall pick. But there's plenty others, and I will talk about them throughout this video. It just seems to be a habit of GM Terry Fontenot. It's not a GM I really believe in. Now, on offense, I really like what the coaching staff has done. I think Zach Robinson's really promising, and I think it was cool how they inherited the running game that they had from Arthur Smith, but they didn't just completely overcorrect like GM Terry Fontenot would do. They didn't overcorrect and just make it Bijan Robinson's backfield. They kept Tyler Algier involved, especially early, and then they sort of paced it right to make it Bijan's team, since he is the more electric athlete. So I thought that was really cool, and I think there's a lot to like with him going into year 2, and with Michael Penix going into his year 2, but knowing he is the starter now. So I'm excited to see what they can do. Jeff Ulbrich on defense is a complete unknown. We don't know how much his role in with the New York Jets was, how much he was responsible for, because that defense was great when he was just the defensive coordinator, but it was terrible when he was the interim head coach. Now he was in a constant power struggle with Aaron Rodgers at that point, so who knows what he could have done. But his boss at the time, Robert Saleh, had been fired, and maybe his imprint on the defense was more meaningful. We'll see. His defense has to get better, though, so we'll see if Jeff Ulbrich can do the job. Kirk Cousins is still on their books, and it caused them to largely sit out the 2025 free agency cycle. Leonard Floyd totally makes sense. His best days are definitely behind him, but you need to juice up the pass rush. That's been an issue for the Falcons for years. And so you're hoping there's a little more juice left to squeeze from Leonard Floyd. I don't mind it. He played his college ball at Georgia, so I'm sure that Leonard Floyd's psyched to be there. Divine Diablo, again, fine. None of this really moves the needle. Neither does Morgan Fox. These are simply depth pieces to add into this defense. They didn't really have any money to spend unless they had figured out a way to get another team to take Kirk Cousins' money, and that proved to be impossible. It would have happened already if there was a team who really wanted Kirk Cousins. So this was just what they were left with, and that'll have to do. Now, they've had to juice up their pass rush. We've talked about that already. But they've hamstrung themselves from a resource perspective because last year they gave away their third-round pick this year to get Matthew Judon from the Patriots. He proved to do nothing and is now a free agent, not even on their team. So that's one of the ways in which they missed that leads them to doing this in the 2025 draft. They, in my opinion, overdraft Jalen Walker. That is not a widely shared opinion, though. I could be totally wrong. I think he's extremely situational. I think he's got a good head on his shoulders, but I don't think he knows where he's going most of the time, and we'll see if they can figure out how to just harness him directly at the quarterback as an edge rusher, but when he was an off-ball linebacker at Georgia, I thought a lot of his tape was a mess. The thing that is unforgivable, though, is trading up into the first round for James Pierce and giving up a first-round pick in the 2026 draft to do it. James Pierce is a highly polarizing prospect. Some of his bend and get around the edge ability on tape is the best in this class. There are flashes that are incredible. He doesn't really play the run at all. There are questions about his effort in practice and his engagement on and off the field. He also played a limited snap count because Tennessee, their defense uses like this hockey line rotation style. And so if we're going to scale him up, we don't know what that's going to look like if we scale up his snap count. So it's tragic that Terry Fontenot gave up a 2026 first-round pick for a player with this many red flags. That is absolutely, like I said, unforgivable. It's one of the few stances I feel strong about because these guys work in front offices and I don't. They have a lot more football training than me, but this just feels like a no-brainer waste of resources. And these are the problems, one begetting the next. More redundancies. They take a safety I love in Xavier Watts, but then they take another safety that I like fine in Billy Bowman. We don't need to be double addressing safety here. Unless you're telling me Jeff Ulbrich is coming in and needing to run 3 safety sets all the time. But that just doesn't sound right to me. So why are we doing this? I would have loved just the Xavier Watts pick and then use that 4th round pick to address a different position because you want to have health throughout your team. For example, offensive line. They just lost their center in free agency, Drew Dahlman. We don't know that some of their older pieces are definitely going to keep playing at a high level. And what if there are injuries? I would have loved spending the 4th round pick on some good, solid offensive line depth. They do address offensive line in the 7th, but there's a meaningful drop from pick 118 to pick 218 in the level of prospect you're getting. So these are just more of the things that leave me scratching my head about Terry Fontenot. I do sneaky think Nick Nash is going to be a pretty good receiver, though. They got him as a steal with as an undrafted free agent. We already talked about redundancy being an issue for this team. I think role is another. I already talked about Jalen Walker and James Pierce being undersized, maybe really only being situational pass rushers. Jalen Walker probably has the ability to do more just because he's a smart and thoughtful and hardworking player. But we don't know that for sure. It's true in the secondary too. I mean, if they're going to get snaps from Clark Phillips and Billy Bowman, these are guys who are undersized for their role. You look at their defensive line, and Rzonca was their second-round pick last year. They spent 3 picks right after picking Michael Penix to address the defensive line, and only Rzonca is in the starting lineup from those 3. The other 2, Brandon Dorlus and Braylon Trice, don't even make the top 2 lines of this depth chart. So they're going to need to get a lot from him. I don't see him as a nose tackle like Our Lads is listing him. So role is going to be interesting. We're going to see how Jeff Ulbrich puts the pieces together. I don't think the pieces are there to put a cohesive defense together, unless Jesse Bates has an Defensive Player of the Year, 8 interception season, which he could. I don't see this defense being very good. Oh well, Falcons fans. However, your offense has a lot of promise, and we're going to talk about them next. The fulcrum for me with the Atlanta Falcons is Bijan Robinson. And that may sound crazy because Bijan's floor is very high, and usually the fulcrum would be reserved for someone or a unit where the swings could be very wild. But let me put it this way. Unless Bijan Robinson has a Saquon level season from a year ago or a Christian McCaffrey level season from 2 years ago, I don't think the Falcons can win the division. But I absolutely think he can have that kind of season, so he's worth discussing as the fulcrum. I think there's a lot of meat left on the bone for how Bijan can be used and how he relates to Michael Penix. Michael Penix isn't twitchy, but he's actually kind of a fast straight line athlete, and so I think some read option stuff would be very dangerous with Penix and with Bijan Robinson. I know people might get worried about Penix's injury history, but there's a way to get that done right. And Penix has such a good arm that I think Bijan on wheel routes or even just split out wide is a threat where Michael Penix can hit those spots to the exterior of the field in a way that plenty of quarterbacks can't. So Bijan is looking like he's going to have a hell of a season, and it's not like he's the only good skill player on this offense. I mean, Drake London's an awesome receiver. Darnell Mooney is a perfectly serviceable number 2. We can all hold a candle for Kyle Pitts. Maybe there's still something in there. But Bijan is the straw that stirs the drink. And I think that if he has that kind of 2,000 plus all-purpose yard season, that's the recipe, and maybe the only recipe for the Falcons being the NFC South division winner. With a win total of 7.5, it's harder than it was with the Panthers since they had a win fewer in their total. I will take the over simply because I do believe in Bijan Robinson and Zach Robinson, the OC, to be able to cook up something neat on that side of the ball. And they have a more favorable schedule than the Panthers from their unique opponent's perspective. The Colts are a complete unknown on what they're going to be. The Commanders, that's a similar situation where I don't really believe in that defense. And so that could just be a shootout, and you never know. It's whoever holds the pen last is going to be able to win that game. And the Vikings, you never know with the young quarterback. So they actually got a more favorable draw, even though they have the second place schedule as opposed to the third place schedule. But we've already talked about just some of the generalized issues with the Falcons. They have the same thing as the Panthers, where if their offensive line isn't quite as healthy as it was, do they have the depth behind it to support that? So I actually would pick the Panthers to more likely have a better record than the Falcons, but I'll give both of them the edge to their over. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This team has comfortably held on to the division for the last few years. I don't think it's going to be so comfortable in 2025, though. The competition's gotten better, and this team is still good. Jason Light and Todd Bowles both got extensions this offseason because of how good the team has been. And I like Jason Light as a GM. I think he generally has the right approach. I think he focuses on the offensive line, which is a big deal. That always sets the table for any team, much less this team that had an old Tom Brady and then Baker Mayfield needing to resurrect his career. The offensive line was able to create a pocket for both of those guys and should continue to do so. The defensive line, though, still has some question marks, and we'll get into that. So it'll be interesting to see how Light's investments in the D-line pay off or don't pay off this year. And then there's Todd Bowles. I don't really believe in Todd Bowles. I think it comes down mostly to his decision-making. I think back to the Chiefs game in the regular season last year. The Bucs are in Arrowhead. They have scored a touchdown. They're down 23-24. They could go for 2, and they have the best red zone offense in the league, so they really should. They decide not to. They kick the extra point. They tie it up 24-24. They go into overtime. The Chiefs win the game. That's just a wasted opportunity. Now, would they have necessarily gotten the extra point? No. But by extending the game as the away team with the defending Super Bowl champions, that's just bad process to me. So I don't really believe in Todd Bowles, although he is a good coach who definitely sets a good floor. I still don't see this team going far. Even if they do win the division, I think they'll get bounced in the playoffs by a better team. But he has always hired good offensive people the last few years. That's the one thing I'll give him. Dave Canales was good enough in 1 year to go get the Panthers head coaching job. Liam Cohen was good enough last year to get the Jaguars head coaching job. They've promoted Josh Grizzard from internally, and Liam Cohen wanted to take Josh Grizzard with him to Jacksonville, and they didn't let him. So they have a lot of faith in Josh Grizzard to be the answer for the future, and there's a lot of hype in media circles about him too. So we'll see what he can do. They still have a lot of good offensive talent, but I still just always worry about the ceiling with this team under Todd Bowles. Now, the Buccaneers weren't super active in free agency, just like the Falcons weren't. But for the Falcons, it was a little more out of that necessity of the Kirk Cousins deal that they paid the year prior. For the Buccaneers, they just wanted to keep the powder dry for their own homegrown talent. The most notable being that they paid Chris Godwin, wide receiver. They got him to stay in Tampa despite getting bigger offers from places like the Patriots. So that was really good business. Also, Tristan Wirfs is probably the best offensive lineman in the whole league. His money's hitting the books now. So there's a lot of reasons that are good, that they've had good team building that led to them not being so active in free agency. The biggest signing was Hassan Reddick. That's an interesting deal. Hassan Reddick, if you don't know the story, was traded from the Eagles to the Jets before last season, and then he just said, no, I don't want to play here unless you give me a new contract. And the Jets said, sorry, we traded for you. And they were just in a stalemate forever. And it's just going to be so interesting to see. Now he's on this new Prove It deal. His deal expired, and the Jets, he wasn't going to go back there. We'll see what kind of Hassan Reddick shows up at this age in Tampa. The Bucs had my second favorite draft in the NFC South and my 13th favorite draft in the whole league. Now, the Emeka Egbuka pick in the first round definitely caught me off guard when I was watching. I didn't think that they needed to spend this pick on wide receiver, knowing that they had Mike Evans and re-signed Chris Godwin and had gotten a lot of good stuff out of Jalen McMillan last year. He was a rookie in 2024, and I even liked Trey Palmer, so I was like, this is a lot of capital to be spending on a receiver. Is this redundancy? The more I thought about it, one, unlike with the Falcons and their issues with the redundancy, they didn't overpay. This was at least the right value for this pick. And two, the timelines of the players are a little different. Whereas with the Falcons, they just have a bunch of young pass rushers and Leonard Floyd, but mostly a bunch of young pass rushers who are unproven, and they're trying to figure out whether that's going to lead to a pass rush. With the Buccaneers wide receiver room, Mike Evans is definitely on the way out at some point. Actually, I shouldn't say that. He might just be immortal. Chris Godwin is coming off of an injury, and maybe he will have lost some juice. So even though they paid him, they may need to move on from him soon. And Emeka Egbuka is a really good blocker who will still be relevant even if he's not a big pass catcher. So it makes sense. If he was the best player on their board, and they feel like timeline-wise, they just don't want to ever have a gap at wide receiver, then I like it. And this is a really good player. Now, the defense is the thing that needed the most help, and I would have drafted a defender in the first round instead of Emeka Egbuka, even though I do respect the pick. But since they took Benjamin Morrison in the second and Jacob Parrish in the third, I think they did a nice job really fixing the secondary. This secondary did not have the same bite to it last year when they didn't have Carlton Davis, who had been traded to the Lions, and Antoine Winfield Jr. didn't play a full season. If you get Winfield back healthy and you add these pieces in with what they have, Jamel Dean, if he can still play at a high level, this is a nice secondary. Benjamin Morrison in particular could have been a first-round talent if he didn't have severe hip injuries that he's battling. And then I also would have drafted defensive line earlier than they did, though I do really like David Walker. I think he plays with ferocity. Yes, he played at Central Arkansas. His level of competition wasn't as high. I think his power translates. So I like that pick a lot, but I would have rearranged some things in this draft. I still think that they got a lot of talent that's going to help the team. This defense still has a little bit of work to do. There's a lot of older pieces like Lavonte David. Lavonte David was an awesome player. He has passed his prime. Now, Servasia Dennis is a player I like, and if he can start to step into that role, if they can pass the torch effectively, that would be amazing. But a lot of people were calling for the Buccaneers to take Jahad Campbell, for example, at pick 19, the linebacker out of Alabama, because there isn't this sense that it's just a natural transition from David to Dennis on the back end, captaining the defense. We'll see. Player I like, but not sure about that. I do think the secondary is improved, but the defensive line as a whole still needs work. And this is where we talk about generating pass rush, because all teams need to do it, especially teams that have the expectations that the Buccaneers do of themselves. And Todd Bowles is a willing blitzer. He's very known for his blitz packages, but blitzing, sending more than 4 defenders, is not always the best way to generate a pass rush consistently. I think that's why they signed Haason Reddick. I think they know they need a guy who can generate pass rush for them a little more consistently in one-on-one settings. And that's why the fulcrum for this team is so obviously Haason Reddick. I think they're relying on him to be a true pass rusher, like we've seen him be at other stops in his career. And it's cool because, you know, the Falcons are really hoping that Jalen Walker can take this same arc, be a off-ball linebacker in college who becomes a real demon of a pass rusher in the league. They get to watch Haason Reddick try, show the end of that timeline to them in their own division if he's fully invested. I mean, this is what it comes down to. Haason Reddick is a wild character in how he handled the contract dispute with the Jets. Obviously, he signed this deal. He's willing to come in. Clearly, his agents made it clear to him, this is the only deal that you have. Like, this is what it has to be. But we'll see how invested he is, and we'll see what kind of production he can give you now. If he does, it really changes the tenor of this defense. If he is a 13-sack guy who teams have to game plan more for, that frees up blitz lanes for the rest of Todd Bowles' creations, what he's going to cook up. That's what it comes down to. This defense will be allowing many points a game, in my opinion, if they don't have Haason Reddick delivering that real pass rush juice. All said, I give the Buccaneers the division win. But their over-under is 9.5, and I think that's one of the most perfectly set lines in the league. I'm going to take the under. I'm going to have them win the division at 9-8, a very typical NFC South thing to do. And I'm going to have the Panthers at 9-8, but losing out on tiebreakers and having the Falcons at 8-9. I think that's where I lean. But back just to the Buccaneers, I think their line of 9.5 is perfectly set. I think they went 10-7 last year, and they, had a couple of games that could have gone either way, right down to the end. So their offense is going to be good. Baker Mayfield has proven himself. I don't think that there's some massive regression coming for him. We like the way we'll see with Sam Darnold. Has he really proven himself yet, or is there still maybe a hiccup there? I don't see that with Baker. I think he's going to be a good quarterback, even if he's not like a top 6 fantasy quarterback this year. But I still have worries about the defense and worries about Todd Bowles in critical moments, and they have some older players where health is a concern. So I think I would have to lean the under barely for them. But again, their line is so perfectly set. And there you have it, the NFC South. This is a better division than it has been. Usually the NFC South has a mediocre division winner and they get bounced right away in the playoffs. I do think that the high end of this division isn't there. None of these teams are elite. But now we have 3 pretty competitive teams that should make a little dent in the landscape of the league instead of a bunch of pushovers. The Falcons may be a little frustrating, and the Panthers may not be quite as good as I think is possible for them. And the Buccaneers may just roll to a boring division win. But I think there's a lot of intrigue with those three teams. And then with the Saints, hang in there, guys, and get yourself a quarterback next year, and hopefully things are looking up then. But thanks for watching. Really appreciate you being here. This is my second ever video, and I'd really appreciate it if you like and subscribe and share the video and give me feedback. Write in the comments things that you'd like to see. I am going to do the other 6 divisions this summer, and I've got maybe 1 or 2 other videos I want to cook up before the season starts. But from there, it's really an open road, and I'd be interested to hear what you want to be seeing on this channel. So thank you for being here with me at Light Boxes. Again, I'm Rob Ballantine, and I'll see you soon.